Hello, boys and girls. I'm Mrs. Norton, and I'm here today because I'm going to read you a lovely story. The story I've got is called Tyrannosaurus Drip. I wonder if anybody's heard of it before. This story is actually from my little boy's collection, and he just loves listening to the story because he absolutely loves dinosaurs. And this is a special story because it's about a little dinosaur who ends up getting mixed up and ends up being born into the wrong dinosaur family. And it's about what happens to him and where he gets up to with his adventures. So let's see what happens to this little dinosaur and if he manages to get to be where he originally came from. Tyrannosaurus Drip. In a swamp beside a river, where the land was thick with veg, lived a herd of duck-billed dinosaurs who roamed the water's edge. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water reeds. Now across the rushy river, on a hill the other side, lived a mean Tyrannosaurus with his grim and grisly bride. And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. But the two Tyrannosauruses, so grisly, mean and grim, couldn't catch the duck-billed dinosaurs because they couldn't swim. And they muttered, down with water, and they muttered, down with wet, and they muttered, what a shame that bridges aren't invented yet. Yeah. Now a little Compsognathus, but for short, we'll call her Comp, found a duckbill egg and stole it from a nest beside the swamp. And she swam with it and ran with it and murmured, clever me! And won't the baby Comps be thrilled with duckbill egg for tea? She dropped the egg in terror and went running for her life from the mean Tyrannosaurus and his grim and grisly wife. And the duckbill egg went rolling, and at last it came to rest in, of all the unlikely places, the Tyrannosaurus nest. Now the mother T had great big jaws and great enormous legs, but her brain was rather little, and she couldn't count her eggs. And she sang, hatch out, my terrors, with your scaly little tails, your spiky little toothies, and your scary little nails. Yeah. In the nest. Out hatched babies 1 and 2, as perfect as could be. But Mother T was horrified with baby number 3. And she grumbled, he looks weedy. And she grumbled, he looks weak. And she grumbled, what long arms. And look, his mouth is like a beak. He just needs feeding up, said Dad, and gave the babes some meat. The first 2 gulped and guzzled, but the third refused to eat. And he said, I'm really sorry. And he said, I simply can't. And he said, this meat looks horrible. I'd rather eat a plant. Refusing to eat. A plant? Yelled Mum in terror. And Dad said, get a grip. His sisters found a name for him, Tyrannosaurus Drip. And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. Poor Tyrannosaurus Drip tried hard to sing along, but the others yelled, you silly Drip, you've got the words all wrong. For he hooted, down with hunting, and he hooted, down with war, and he hooted, down with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. Drip's sisters soon grew big enough to hunt with Mum and Dad, but they turned on Drip and told him, you're not fierce enough to come. And he cried, they've gone without me. And he cried, alack-a-day. And he cried, this doesn't feel like home. I'm going to run away. So he ran off to the river where he saw a lovely sight, a herd of duck-billed dinosaurs, all hooting with delight. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water reeds. And he stood there on the bank. As he stood there on the bank, a sudden urge took over him, and he jumped into the water and discovered he could swim. And the duckbills came to greet him by the rushy river's edge, and they hooted, "Nice to meet you." And they hooted, "Here, have some veg." And Drip, who was delighted that they hadn't run away, ate bellyfuls of water reeds and played with them all day. Then he gazed into the river and he asked them, "Who, oh, who is that creature in the water?" And they laughed and said, "It's you," looking at himself in the reflection. That night the lightning crackled and a storm blew down a tree and it fell across the river, and the teas cried out, "Yippee!" And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. Drip's sisters stepped onto the bridge, but then began to frown, for there in front of them stood Drip, who yelled, "Look out! Look down!" And they looked into the water, and they each let out a yelp, and one cried, "Water monsters!" and the other one cried, "Help!" What are they looking at in the water? Their mother scolded, "Nonsense," and she joined them on the tree. Then she looked into the water and exclaimed, "Good gracious me!" The three of them stood trembling, and Dad said, "Get a grip. You're all of you as drippy as Tyrannosaurus Drip." He strode onto the bridge and scoffed, "I bet there's nothing there." Then he looked into the water and he jumped into the air. What did he see? And how the duckbills hooted when he landed with a crash, and the tree bridge broke, and 4 Tyrannosauruses went splash! And spluttering and clinging to the branches of the tree, they went whooshing down a waterfall and all the way to sea. And the duckbills hooted happily. They hooted, "Hip, hip, hip! Hooray for the heroic, one and only Duckbill Drip." I hope you enjoyed that story, boys and girls. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in September. Take care. Bye. See you soon.